At our engagement party, my fiancé announced, "My ex is my true love. I'm just settling for you." I stayed silent. The next morning, I went scorched earth. Sup Reddit. My fiancé humiliated me at our engagement party. She invited her ex and said in front of everyone that I was basically her placeholder. I just smiled. The next day, I made some calls that destroyed their careers. I'm Elias, 33 male, and I run what's probably the most boring business that actually pays good money. I help companies research their competitors. Think private detective meets spreadsheet nerd meets human search engine. Big companies pay me serious cash to dig through government records and financial reports to find out what their competition is really up to. My best friend Enzo likes to say I'm basically a professional dirt finder. He'd been my buddy since college. He's a lawyer who handles company buyouts. He finds the legal problems. I find the money problems. Together, we've killed more bad business deals than you can count. Enzo was also the guy who warned me about Andrea from day one. He was right, but I was thinking with the wrong head, so I ignored him. Andrea was everything I thought I wanted. Gorgeous, social, connected. She ran what she called an influencer marketing agency, which was basically 3 part-time workers and an Instagram account with sketchy follower numbers. The warning signs were there from the start. She had expensive taste, but a business that made about as much money as a kid's lemonade stand. Her agency was run out of our spare bedroom, but she talked about it like she was the next big thing in advertising. "We're changing how marketing works," she'd say with a straight face, usually while putting a $300 lunch on her business credit card. But the biggest red flag was Jared, her ex-boyfriend, who somehow managed to show up at every social event. He ran a small investment firm. The guy was everything I wasn't. Tall, traditionally good-looking, old money confident, and apparently still very much on Andrea's mind. He'd show up at parties like a bad rash, making inside jokes with Andrea, and treating me like the hired help. Enzo absolutely hated the guy. After Jared crashed Andrea's birthday dinner uninvited, Enzo told me the guy was slimier than a used car salesman, and that he'd looked into Jared's investment firm out of curiosity. Turns out Jared had 2 bankruptcies in the past 10 years, and a regulatory record that read like a horror story. I should have paid more attention to Enzo's research, but I was distracted by wedding planning. The irony isn't lost on me. Here's what I didn't know. Andrea had set up automatic transfers from our joint checking account to her business account. Every time her agency couldn't pay its bills, which was every month, money would automatically move from our personal funds to cover her business expenses. I found this out 3 weeks before our engagement party, when I was going through our bank statements for a mortgage application. Suddenly, weird $2,000 to $3,000 transfers started making sense. "Andrea," I called from my home office. "Can you come here for a minute?" She bounced in wearing yoga pants and an oversized sweater. "What's up, babe?" I turned my laptop toward her. "Can you explain these automatic transfers to your business account?" Her face went from Instagram ready to "oh crap, I've been caught" in about 2 seconds. "Oh, that's just backup funding. For cash flow stuff." Cash flow stuff that's moved $18,000 from our personal account in 6 months? It's just temporary. The agency's about to land this huge client, a supplement company with massive growth potential. I stared at her. $18,000, Andrea. That's more than some people make in 6 months. But it's an investment in our future. Once the agency takes off, we'll be set financially. I wanted to ask exactly how an Instagram marketing company with 3 part-time employees was going to make that kind of money. But I was trying to be supportive. Big mistake. Enzo had thoughts about this when I told him over coffee. He pointed out that she'd been secretly using my money to fund her fake business, while I paid for everything else. And she thought this was investing in our future. When I said maybe the supplement deal would work out, he pulled out his phone and searched for the company. Within 30 seconds, he showed me an FDA warning letter from 6 months ago. They were making fake health claims and breaking federal marketing rules. The FDA keeps a public list of warning letters. Takes about 10 seconds to search if you know where to look. So Andrea's big client was a company actively breaking federal marketing rules and probably about to get sued into the ground. That's when I started wondering what other public records might be interesting to check out. Just curiosity, you know. But before I could dig deeper, Andrea decided to throw an engagement announcement party that would change everything. The party was her idea. "We need to make a statement," she said. She rented a rooftop place in downtown LA, hired a photographer, got catering for 50 people, and sent out invitations that looked like something from a Fortune 500 meeting. The guest list was her trust fund friends, social media contacts, and family, plus my business contacts who probably thought they were going to a networking event. Enzo was my backup for the evening. "This feels like a show," he said, fixing his tie as we walked into the venue. Like she's trying to convince everyone, including herself, that she's excited about marrying you. You're being paranoid. I'm being observant. There's a difference. The venue was beautiful, I'll give her that. She looked amazing, working the crowd like she was running for office. She introduced me to her friends as my fiancé, the business consultant. But Jared showing up should have been my first warning. He arrived fashionably late, hugged Andrea way too long, and made himself comfortable like he was co-hosting the party. Enzo muttered something about how interesting it was that the ex-boyfriend got invited. When I said Andrea told me they were just friends now, he replied that sure, and he was just a lawyer who occasionally practiced law. Then came the speech that destroyed everything. Andrea grabbed the microphone and called for attention. The conversation died as everyone turned toward her, glasses raised. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she began. "This is such a special moment for me, and I wanted to share it with the people who matter most. I have to be honest with all of you," she continued, her voice getting more dramatic. "I never thought I'd get married. There was someone who showed me what real love felt like, what true passion meant." The room went dead quiet. "Jared," she said, her eyes finding him across the room, "you'll always be the one who got away. The love of my life." I watched 50 people's jaws hit the floor at the same time. My biggest client's wife actually gasped out loud. Jake, my business partner, looked like he wanted to crawl under a table. Enzo, standing next to me, muttered, "Oh, heck no." "But sometimes," Andrea continued, "life isn't about passion. Sometimes it's about finding someone reliable, someone stable, someone who'll never break your heart because they could never inspire that kind of intensity anyway." She held up her engagement ring like she was accepting an award. "So I'm thrilled to announce my engagement to someone who will take very, very good care of me." The silence was deafening. Jared raised his glass with a smug grin that made me want to punch him. A couple of Andrea's girlfriends started that awkward pity clapping. Enzo looked at me with an expression that clearly said, "I told you so, but now isn't the time to say it." I didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't make a scene. Just took a slow sip of my drink, smiled slightly, and started a mental countdown. T-minus however long it takes to research someone who just made the biggest mistake of her life. Jake caught my eye from across the room and raised his eyebrows questioningly. I gave him the tiniest shake of my head. Princess Andrea had just disrespected someone who gets paid to find problems hiding in public records. "Well," Enzo said quietly, finishing his drink, "this should be interesting. Game on." The party ended about as well as you'd expect. Half the guests left right after Andrea's speech, including two of my biggest clients. Enzo stayed until the end, just making sure I processed what actually happened, because that wasn't just disrespectful. That was public humiliation designed to put me in my place as the backup option. Andrea was completely clueless. She spent the ride home talking about how emotional and authentic her speech had been, and how everyone seemed really moved by her honesty. "Did you see Jared's face?" she said, fixing her lipstick in the passenger mirror. "I think he finally understands what he lost." I drove in silence, already mentally organizing the research project that was about to take over my life. That night, after she passed out still wearing her engagement dress like some twisted Cinderella, I went into my home office and opened a new case file. Here's what people don't understand about my work. It's not about hacking or corporate spying or any of that movie nonsense. It's about being really, really good at finding and understanding publicly available information that most people don't know exists. Every business deal, every professional license, every court filing, every government complaint, it's all public record. You just need to know where to look and how to connect the dots. So, I started with basic business research on Andrea's company. Her influencer marketing agency was set up as an LLC in California, which meant I could look at her business filings through the state's website. The filings were immediately interesting. Her registered address was our condo. Fine, lots of small businesses use home addresses. But her business license showed 3 employees, while her workers' compensation filings showed 0 coverage. Either she was lying about her business size or she wasn't properly protecting her workers. More interesting was her business banking setup. Her LLC account was connected to our joint checking account as backup funding, which explained the mysterious transfers I'd found. But using personal money to cover business expenses creates tax problems that she probably hadn't thought about. I pulled her business credit report next. Since I was listed as a personal guarantor on several of her business accounts, I had legal access to this information. The report showed a pattern of late payments, maxed out credit lines, and a disturbing habit of using business credit for clearly personal expenses. I called Enzo the next morning asking for a favor. He immediately guessed I wanted him to research my ex-fiance's business practices using his fancy legal database access. I want everything: business filings, professional licenses, government compliance history, the works. What about Jared? Him too. If I'm going to research the ex-boyfriend, I might as well be thorough. Enzo's law firm had access to legal databases that made my research tools look like kids' toys. Within 24 hours, he'd put together a preliminary report that was absolutely beautiful. He called me from his office the next evening to tell me I was going to love this. Andrea's business was basically a house of cards built on quicksand. Her business license expired in 3 weeks, and she hadn't filed for renewal. Her workers' comp insurance was canceled for non-payment 6 months ago. She'd been claiming employees on her tax forms, but not actually providing the required protections. Even better was the IRS situation. She'd been claiming personal expenses as business tax write-offs for 2 years, European vacation as market research, designer clothes as brand development, spa treatments as networking events. The IRS has computer programs that eventually flag this kind of pattern. And Jared? Enzo's voice got noticeably happier when he got to Jared. The guy was a goldmine of professional problems. 2 personal bankruptcies, multiple court judgments for unpaid debts, and a regulatory record that read like a textbook on what not to do as an investment advisor. He was required to tell his clients about his bankruptcy history and financial problems, but based on his client agreements, it looked like he'd been telling people he had a clean financial record, while his public filings showed the opposite. That's a career-ending compliance violation. But the crown jewel of Enzo's research was Andrea's family business. Hartwell Development had been playing fast and loose with environmental rules for years. EPA violations, safety citations, permit problems, all sitting in public databases, waiting for someone to connect the dots. Serious enough that if the right agency started asking questions, the whole company could face federal criminal charges. I had enough information to understand exactly who I was dealing with. Now I just needed to decide how to present these findings to the right people. Well, I will have to make some calls. Thank you, Enzo. Anytime, you magnificent bastard. I love when you start thinking with the right head. Then the next morning, I started making calls. The beautiful thing about government agencies is that they actually want citizens to report violations. They don't have the resources to watch every business, so they rely on public tips to find problems. And I was about to become the most helpful citizen they'd talk to all month. First call: FDA's Office of Dietary Supplement Programs. Hi, I'm calling to report potentially misleading health claims in social media marketing. I have documentation of specific Instagram posts promoting dietary supplements with fake medical benefits. The FDA rep was immediately interested. Social media violations are notoriously hard for them to track. Can you provide specific examples? I had screenshots of Andrea's Instagram posts promoting VitaBoost Plus products with claims like boosts immune system 300% and clinically proven to prevent illness. Claims that weren't backed up by any actual clinical studies. We'll need the business information for both the influencer and the supplement company, the rep said. I provided Andrea's business registration details, her Instagram handle, the vitamin company's information, and specific post dates. This will trigger an investigation, the rep warned. Both parties will be notified that complaints have been filed. I understand. Second call: FINRA's tip line. Jared's disclosure violations were exactly the kind of thing they investigate. I'd like to report concerns about a registered investment advisor's client disclosure practices. I gave them Jared's registration information and the case numbers for his bankruptcy filings and court judgments. We'll start an examination of his disclosure practices, the rep said. This type of violation typically results in client notification requirements. Third call: California Secretary of State Business Compliance Division. I'm calling to report a business that appears to be operating without proper licensing and worker protections. They're claiming employees, but not carrying required workers' compensation insurance. Fourth call: IRS Business Tax Tip Line. I have information about a business that appears to be claiming personal expenses as business tax write-offs on federal tax returns. We'll start a correspondence audit, the rep said. The business will need to provide documentation justifying claim deductions. All of these reports were completely legitimate. I wasn't making up problems. I was simply reporting existing violations to appropriate authorities using publicly available information. But the most important call was to Madison, Andrea's younger sister. Madison was everything Andrea wasn't. Actually employed, professionally competent, and completely exhausted by her sister's nonsense. She worked as a marketing coordinator for a local nonprofit, actually earned her salary, and had been watching Andrea's business train wreck for months. I invited her for coffee. I want to make sure I'm being supportive of Andrea's family relationships, I told her. But I'm worried about some of the stress she's been under lately. Madison laughed. You mean the stress of pretending her business is successful while losing money every month? Is it that obvious? Elias, she's been asking Dad for money constantly, while telling everyone her agency is crushing it. Last month, she needed $3,000 for expansion opportunities that turned out to be a European vacation. She spent the next hour venting about Andrea's relationship with reality. The fake employee count, the fraudulent business expenses, the constant family drama about money. But the real problem is Dad's company, Madison said, lowering her voice. It has been cutting corners for years. Environmental shortcuts, permit violations, safety issues. Dad thinks he's being smart, but he's building up massive regulatory liability. Andrea doesn't know. Andrea doesn't pay attention to anything that isn't about her. She has no idea the family business is basically a federal investigation waiting to happen. Perfect. Madison was accidentally giving me a complete picture of the regulatory violations in both Andrea's business and her family's company. I love my sister, Madison continued, but she's been living in a fantasy world where consequences don't apply to her. That evening, I called Enzo to update him on the day's progress. He asked me to get it straight. I'd reported legitimate violations to 4 different government agencies, all based on publicly available information and genuine compliance concerns? Exactly. And Andrea's sister basically confirmed that the family business was a regulatory time bomb? She didn't mean to, but yes. Enzo liked that. Within a week, the regulatory machinery was in motion. 3 weeks after my report spree, Jared started having what his remaining clients might generously call professional difficulties. FINRA's investigation was proceeding exactly as these things do. Methodically, thoroughly, and very publicly within industry circles. When FINRA investigates an investment advisor, they notify the advisor's clients and request documentation of all material disclosures. Jared's clients started receiving official letters that basically said, "Your investment advisor is under investigation for potential disclosure violations. Please provide documentation of what you were told about his financial history." This created an immediate problem for the guy, because he'd been telling clients he had a clean financial record, while his public bankruptcy filings told a very different story. Enzo was tracking the situation through his legal industry contacts and reported during our weekly lunch that Jared was basically screwed. 3 of his biggest clients had already filed formal complaints with FINRA after receiving those notification letters. Complaints about not telling clients important information. Apparently, he'd been representing himself as financially stable. I worked through my salad, enjoying the show. We were talking about $8 million in client assets under management. Not huge by industry standards, but enough to keep Jared living in Manhattan Beach and driving a Porsche. Jared's response to the investigation was pure panic, which led to exactly the outcome I'd hoped for. He reached out to Andrea for emotional support. I knew this because she started acting stressed and distracted, checking her phone constantly and making excuses to leave the house for errands that took suspiciously long. She couldn't keep secrets to save her life. Within days, she was dropping hints about Jared's business problems and how unfair it was that successful people were being persecuted by bureaucrats. "It's just regulatory harassment," she said over dinner one evening, picking at her food nervously. "Jared's brilliant at what he does." "What kind of regulatory issues?" I asked innocently. "Something about client disclosures. Apparently, he's supposed to tell clients about old financial problems that have nothing to do with his current abilities." I nodded. Financial services is heavily regulated. Disclosure requirements exist to protect investors. But it's ancient history. His bankruptcies were years ago. "Bankruptcies," I said, as if hearing this for the first time. "Multiple bankruptcies?" She realized she'd said too much. "Just financial difficulties from when he was younger." That evening, I pulled up Jared's FINRA records on my laptop and showed Andrea the documentation. 2 bankruptcy filings and 6 civil judgments for unpaid debts, I said, scrolling through the court records. And this stuff isn't ancient history. The most recent judgment was filed 18 months ago. Her face went pale as she read the documents. "Andrea, these are public records. Anyone can look this up. Would you want your financial advisor to tell you if they'd filed for bankruptcy?" "Yes," she said quietly. "Of course." "Then Jared's clients have legitimate concerns. This isn't regulatory harassment. It's about professional ethics and client protection." She didn't respond, but I could see her processing the implications. 2 days later, FINRA suspended Jared's license pending completion of their investigation. Standard procedure for serious disclosure violations. That's when he made his fatal mistake. He panicked and tried to get Andrea to help him financially. She came home from another errand that smelled like expensive coffee and desperation, explaining that he just needed bridge funding until this regulatory thing got resolved. His business operations were suffering because he'd lost some clients because of the investigation, but once everything got cleared up, they'd come back. I stared at her and pointed out that he was under investigation for lying to clients about his bankruptcies. Those clients weren't coming back. She insisted it wasn't lying, just not volunteering irrelevant information. When I asked how much bridge funding we were talking about, she said just $50,000 to cover expenses until his license got reinstated. I nearly choked on my coffee. $50,000? To fund a suspended investment advisor's operating expenses? It's an investment! Once he's back in business, he'll pay it back with interest. Andrea, he's facing potential criminal charges for securities violations. His license might never get reinstated, but I could see in her eyes that she'd already decided to help him. She was just trying to figure out how to access the money without my involvement. That's when I realized this situation was about to escalate to full-scale financial protection mode. Time to have a conversation with Enzo. Enzo was incredulous when I called him that evening. She wanted to give her ex-boyfriend 50 grand. She thought it was an investment in their future together. Enzo pointed out she was engaged to me, and I reminded him that technically yes, but emotionally, she'd been planning her exit strategy since the engagement party. Enzo said I needed to protect my assets immediately. If she had access to joint accounts and decided to fund Jared's legal defense, I could lose everything I'd worked for. He recommended documenting everything, consulting with an attorney about asset protection, and preparing for the fact that this relationship was over. I told him I was already there. That weekend, she made her move. I was in my home office reviewing client files when she appeared in the doorway, dressed like she was going to a business meeting. "I need to talk to you about something important," she said. "Sure. What's up?" "Jared's situation is worse than I thought. His legal fees are going to be enormous, and he's facing financial ruin. That's unfortunate. I want to help him." "How?" She took a deep breath. "I want to loan him $50,000 from our savings." I leaned back in my chair, studying her face. "From our wedding fund? It's just temporary. He'll pay it back once this whole thing gets resolved. Andrea, he's under federal investigation for securities fraud. His assets might be frozen, his license is suspended, and his clients are suing him. What makes you think he'll be able to pay back $50,000? Because I believe in him." And there it was. "No," I said simply. "What?" "No, I'm not funding your ex-boyfriend's legal defense." Her face flushed with anger. "It's not a legal defense. It's bridge funding for a temporary setback. It's $50,000 for a man who's facing criminal charges and has a history of financial irresponsibility. Plus, your ex is none of my concern." "OMG, come on! Don't be ridiculous. Jared is not financially irresponsible." I pulled up his bankruptcy filings on my laptop. She stared at the documents, her confidence faltering. "Andrea, you can loan Jared your own money, but I'm not funding this." My own money? We both knew she didn't have $50,000 of her own. Her business was bleeding money. Her personal savings were non-existent, and her family's money was tied up in a company facing environmental investigations. "Fine," she said, her voice cold. "I'll figure something else out. Good luck with that." After she left, I called Enzo immediately. He said it was time for emergency asset protection and told me to meet him at his office the next morning. We were going to make sure my money stayed my money. That evening, Andrea was on her laptop for hours, probably researching business loans, personal credit options, and other ways to fund Jared's financial crisis. I watched her from across the living room. This woman I'd been planning to marry, desperately trying to figure out how to give another man $50,000 of our money. Enzo was right. This relationship was already over. I just needed to manage the breakup professionally. Time to treat Andrea like a business problem. By week 4, Andrea had transformed to full-time amateur detective. It was like watching someone try to perform brain surgery with a butter knife. The trigger for her investigation escalation was Jared's complete financial collapse. FINRA had not only suspended his license, but frozen his business accounts pending their investigation. His remaining clients had pulled their money, his office lease was in default, and he was facing potential criminal charges for securities fraud. Jared, in his infinite wisdom, had decided that his problems were somehow my fault. "This is too convenient," Andrea announced one evening, pacing around our living room. "Jared's business doesn't just randomly collapse right after our engagement party." "Random?" I said, not looking up from my laptop. "There's nothing random about such things. But everything started going wrong right after you met him. Everything started going wrong when his clients found out he'd been lying to them about his bankruptcy history. How do you know so much about FINRA investigations?" I gestured to my computer screen. Because understanding regulatory processes is literally my job. This answer did not satisfy her. Her first move was to search my browser history, looking for evidence that I'd been researching Jared. She found nothing, because I use private browsing for all research activities. Basic operational security when you work with confidential business information. But instead of concluding that I had nothing to hide, she decided this was evidence of my criminal capabilities. Why do you use private browsing? She demanded, confronting me with my laptop like she'd discovered state secrets. Because I research sensitive business information for clients who pay me for confidentiality. Or because you're hiding your illegal activities. Right. Enzo, who was over for dinner that night, nearly choked on his coffee. He asked what kind of illegal activities. Researching public records too aggressively? Andrea said she didn't know, but she knew I was involved in Jared's problems. Enzo explained with the patience of someone talking to a child that I helped companies research regulatory compliance issues. Jared was violating securities regulations, and this was like blaming a food safety inspector for a restaurant getting shut down for health code violations. Andrea replied that I wouldn't understand, because I was his friend, and probably in on it too. Enzo looked at me with an expression that clearly said, "Your girl has completely lost her mind." Her second move was even more entertaining. She tried to access my professional email accounts, hoping to find evidence of communication with government agencies. This triggered immediate security alerts from my IT provider, who called me the next morning to report multiple failed login attempts on my business accounts. They could trace it to a personal laptop registered to Andrea Hartwell and asked if they should escalate this to law enforcement. I told them not yet. That evening, I confronted her with printouts of the security logs. Any particular reason you tried to hack my email accounts yesterday? Her face went white. I wasn't hacking anything. 14 failed login attempts. The security system logs everything. I spread the documents across the kitchen table. Attempting to access someone else's email accounts without authorization is a federal crime. I just wanted to see if you had anything about Jared. I pulled up the FINRA website on my laptop. Here, Jared Nathaniel. Click on Disclosure Events. She read through his regulatory history in silence. This is all public? She asked quietly. Completely. Her conspiracy theory was crumbling in real time, but she doubled down on paranoia. You still could have contacted his clients, pointed them toward this information. I could have, but I didn't need to. But how did FINRA know to investigate Jared? Because someone reported potential disclosure violations. Agencies rely on public tips to identify problems. Who reported him? I met her eyes directly. Could have been anyone. She stared at me for a long moment, clearly trying to decide whether I was confessing or just explaining regulatory procedures. By the way, Jared's looking at potential criminal charges, civil penalties, and permanent industry prohibition. That's when the full reality of Jared's situation finally hit her. But instead of accepting this and moving on, she decided to escalate her investigation into what she was now calling my shadow operations. Time for phase 3 of her detective career. Andrea's transition from amateur cyber detective to physical surveillance specialist was like watching someone go from playing checkers badly to attempting advanced chess while blindfolded. Her first move was following me to work. It was like being stalked by a golden retriever wearing sunglasses. Same silver BMW every time, her personal car that she'd driven since college, following 3 cars behind like she'd learned surveillance from a 1980s TV show, wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap. Enzo was with me the first time I spotted her. When he asked if we should be concerned, I said only if she was planning to surveillance me to death through secondhand embarrassment. He laughed and asked what the plan was. I suggested we give her a tour of exactly how boring my job actually was, the full treatment. What followed was what Enzo later called the world's most tedious surveillance tour of Los Angeles. I led Andrea on a journey through every aspect of my legitimate business operations, making sure she got a complete picture of exactly how mind-numbingly professional my work actually was. First stop, the law offices of Brennan, where I spent 2 hours reviewing public filings and regulatory documents for a client's merger research. She sat in the parking lot the entire time, probably wondering if I was planning corporate crimes or just really, really slow at whatever criminal masterminds do. Second stop, Morrison and Company CPAs, where I attended a seminar on new SEC disclosure requirements. Riveting stuff about quarterly reporting obligations and paperwork thresholds. She followed me there too, parking across the street at a Starbucks. The parking attendant told me as I left the seminar that my girlfriend had been sitting at that Starbucks for 3 hours, had ordered 6 drinks, and kept taking pictures of my car. The third stop was my personal favorite, the downtown offices of Regulatory Compliance Solutions, where I was delivering a presentation about public records research to their executive team. By this point, Andrea had been following me for 4 hours of the most legitimate business meetings imaginable. I could practically see her questioning her own sanity as she watched me carry briefcases into office buildings and emerge an hour later with stamped receipts and business cards. But the best part was my final stop, the federal courthouse, where I needed to file routine compliance paperwork for a client's regulatory matter. Inside, I filed standard disclosure forms for a client's material event reporting, paid the filing fees, and got stamped receipts proving compliance with federal disclosure requirements. Through the lobby windows, I watched her sit in her car for about 15 minutes, clearly trying to figure out whether her criminal mastermind fiancé was being arrested, confessing to crimes, or meeting with government handlers. When I emerged an hour later with a briefcase full of properly filed federal documents, she was gone. Probably drove home to Google, what does it mean when someone files federal paperwork, and how to tell if a fiancé is actually just really boring. That evening, she confronted me with her latest theory, clearly frustrated by a day of surveillance that had revealed absolutely nothing interesting. I know you're not just a business consultant, she announced. Oh, really? What do you think I am? I don't know, but I followed you to 4 different law offices and a federal courthouse. Normal consultants don't spend all day at legal buildings. I pulled out my business registration, professional licenses, and client contracts, spreading them across the kitchen table. Andrea, read my freaking business license. Look at my professional credentials. I don't care about it. All right, don't. I know you are behind all of this. Wow, that's tough, Sherlock. Stop! I can't believe this. You are such a jerk. I let her rant for about 10 minutes, deep inside, enjoying the show. Then she made one final desperate play. She stormed out of the house that night and didn't come back. Good. Exactly what I wanted. 3 days later, I received a text. I'm staying with Jared. This engagement is over. I replied, okay, I'll have your belongings packed by the weekend. 2 weeks later, she showed up to collect her stuff with Jared in tow. Apparently, he was her moral support. I watched from my office window as they loaded her stuff into Jared's BMW, the same car that would be repossessed 4 months later when his legal bills consumed his remaining assets. Enzo helped me change the locks that afternoon. He asked if I thought she'd try to come back. I said not after what was about to happen to her family's business. Speaking of which, Enzo said, the EPA had contacted Hartwell Development last week, and there was a full compliance audit scheduled for next month. Beautiful. Was that my work? Anonymous tip with supporting documentation, all public records, properly researched and professionally presented. 8 months after Andrea ended our engagement, she showed up at my new house, apparently to catch up about the disaster I put her through. I was in my home office, finishing a research report, when my security system chimed. The camera showed a woman I barely recognized. She had lost weight, not the good kind. Stress weight. Her usually perfect blonde hair was box-dyed brown and growing out at the roots, and she had the hollow-eyed look of someone who'd been living on anxiety and instant ramen for months. Hello, Andrea, I said through the intercom. You look different. Can I come in? Please. Just for 5 minutes. I buzzed her in and watched her walk through my new house, the ocean view property I'd bought with money that was finally completely mine. Her eyes took in the upgraded everything. Nice place, she said, trying to sound casual while clearly fighting back tears and anger. Business consulting must be booming. Business intelligence, I corrected. And yes, it's been a very good year. She stood in my living room, obviously struggling with the reality of what she'd lost. Jared, my family's company, my business, all of it. Her voice was shaking. You destroyed everything. I was right. You orchestrated everything. Then she snapped. You destroyed my entire life. How could you? No, I said, my voice flat and cold. You destroyed your own life by building it on regulatory violations, tax fraud, and financial lies. She was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. I loved Jared. He was the only man I ever really loved. Good for you, Andrea. Now you can love each other away from me. What kind of man destroys someone's life over a speech? I stood up and walked to the window. The kind of man who treats threats to his professional reputation like business problems that require solutions. She was shaking, completely broken. I have nothing left, she whispered. No money, no family support, no career. I'm living in a studio apartment and working at a call center for $14 an hour. I know, I said. I maintain a Google alert for your name. I get updates every time you post another LinkedIn article about resilience and starting over. Her face went white. You're still monitoring me? I'm ensuring you don't do anything that might require additional regulatory reporting. She stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. Andrea, you publicly humiliated me in front of my business partners and professional contacts. You showed me exactly how much respect you had for our relationship. I walked to the door. This isn't cruelty. These are consequences. You declared war on the wrong person. I opened the door. Don't contact me again. Don't mention my name. Move on with your life and pray I never have reason to research your activities again. She walked to the door, defeated and broken. I'm sorry, she said quietly, for what I said at the party, for everything. I looked at her for a long moment. Apology noted, I said, but irrelevant. I closed the door and watched through the security camera as she walked to her beat-up car. She sat in the driver's seat for several minutes, crying, before finally driving away. I poured another drink and went back to my presentation, had a company to research by morning, and Andrea had already taken up enough of my time. YouTube just dropped this new hype feature. If you're hooked on this story, smash that hype button. It tells YouTube this video deserves to blow up, and it keeps even crazier stories coming your way.